Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another installment of the Manufacturer's Efficiency webinar series. My name is Matt Wizeman, Certified Exit Planning Advisor and Leadership Coach. And with me is, of course, Gina Tabasso of Barracuda B2B and Rich Bello of Schooley Mitchell. By using behavioral assessments, we've helped hundreds of sales associates and sales team managers extract improved sales performance throughout every step of their sales process. So today I'm going to be talking about how behavioral assessments can be used to significantly improve the performance of your sales process from lead generation all the way through closing the deal. So I'll just tell you what I'm going to tell you. I want to help us all get on the same page first by talking about what behavioral assessments are, and I'll note a few different types that exist, some of which you've probably heard of. Then I'm going to talk specifically about DiSC, which is the assessment that I use with my clients, and then we'll lead into kind of the meat of the webinar, which is, how do you leverage DiSC profiles, the DiSC profile for an individual and the DiSC profile for teams of people to improve sales outcomes. This can be applied to a wide array of roles and situations, but today we're going to stick to sales. So then I'll wrap things up and open the floor for Q&A. So what is a behavioral assessment? There's lots of definitions out there that define what it is, but I'll first start with this, the clinical definition, if you will, which is used by the American Psychological Association, which is that it is basically a method of using a number of different tools and techniques to evaluate an individual's behavior. And as you can imagine, this can be utilized across, a wide array of applications within the field of psychology. But again, for the purpose of this webinar, we're concerned about behavioral assessments in a professional setting. So for that, I liked Hi People IO's definition, which states that a behavioral assessment is a systematic process of evaluating and measuring an individual's behaviors, competencies, and traits to assess their suitability for a specific role. So in that definition, the use of behavioral assessments is being specifically applied for determining an individual's fit for a role they're being considered for, or a role that they're already in. Maybe if they're struggling, what could be the source of their struggles. And so during this webinar, I'm going to show you how we can apply DiSC assessments, the DiSC behavioral assessment to again, the sales process and the role of a sales associate to, of course, in order to help improve their performance and improve the performance of your overall sales process for your organization. So types of behavioral assessments that are out there, again, there are many types. Many of us you've probably heard of. Myers-Briggs and the Hogan Personality Inventory are two that have been out there for a long time. They all have their own applications that they're best suited for. But again, for us, in my company, Focal Point, we use DiSC and we leverage it in a lot of different ways to help our clients. So what is DiSC? Many people believe that, they feel like DiSC is a personality test. And, first of all, it's not a test. There's no pass-fail result. There is no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. All of the four different criteria that a DiSC assessment evaluates an individual against all have their strengths and limitations. It's not about your personality. Your personality is composed of the things on both of these lists before you, the what it is and the what it isn't. But DiSC itself is only for the measurement of observable behaviors. So a person's emotions, how they react in given situations, their tone, body language, etc. So you may meet somebody who has the same DiSC profile as you and think, well, geez, I'm not anything like that person. And that could very well be true. You would be correct, because a person is made up of many different factors, and DiSC is only evaluating again, the their behaviors, which is a small component of an overall individual. We humans are very complex beings. So the other thing I want to note here, and we will touch on briefly, is that a DiSC profile has both a natural style and an adapted style. So the natural style is, in other words, your behavioral style when left to your own devices, when you're just working on your own, what is your natural state, if you will. While the adapted style is how you adjust your behavior given external influences. So, we'll get into that a little bit more, but it's, a DiSC assessment, our DiSC assessments can identify both your natural style, the individual's natural style, and their adapted style. So what does DiSC measure? There's four factors that DiSC measures. The D is dominance. This factor measures how you or the individual responds to problems and challenges. This is obviously very important because how many problems and challenges do we encounter in a given day? Many. So that's an important measure. I is for influence. This is the factor that measures how you influence people to your point of view. How important is influence to the success of your job or your role. S is for steadiness. This is the factor that measures consistency and how you pace yourself. And then finally, C is compliance. This factor measures how you respond to procedures and constraints set by others. How compliant are you to, a given process in your position? And when we do a DiSC profile on an individual, there are lots of charts and graphs that are generated. The reports that we provide individuals and manager and team managers are really extensive, but this is the one, kind of one of the key chart that basically shows how a person measures in each of the four factors. And it summarizes their score in dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And so, for this example, this person scored relatively high in dominance and influence. So this person will, we'll get into this a bit more. This person will tend to be more aggressive in a given situation, maybe a little more chatty, which we'll talk about a bit when it comes to influence. So, this is kind of a typical a profile for an individual when they take a DiSC assessment. So before we get into how we leverage DiSC for improved sales outcomes, I just want to state that there's no right or wrong when it comes to DiSC profiles. A given profile, doesn't mean that an individual is more likely to be a great leader or the next, Fortune 100 CEO. There are profiles that perform better in certain situations than others, but ultimately every profile can, a person people who have all different profiles can all be very successful, leveraging their dominant traits or their primary traits. So how do we leverage DiSC for improved outcomes? Well, let's get on the same page and just state, what a sales process looks like. This is fairly typical. Most companies think of their sales process like a funnel where, at the top, you've got your lead gen, you're bringing new prospects into the process, doing cold outreach and networking, things along those lines. And it's where, the lines between sales and marketing blur a little bit, right? Marketing is also, doing things to help lead generation and bring things into the top of the funnel. But again, most companies think of their sales process in this manner. Some will have more phases, some will have fewer, but ultimately it starts at the top with bringing leads in and funnels down to a close step where you're sealing the deal. And throughout the process, there are, of course, the sellers and the buyers. And what I'm going to show in the next section is how we can leverage DiSC to improve the performance of the people on the seller side, on the sales side. So if you're a salesperson yourself, or if you are the manager of a sales department, we can leverage DiSC to help both the individual improve as well as the manager help their team overall improve with their ability to ultimately close deals. So first, we'll start on the sales side. So the chart on the left comes from a DiSC assessment type that we use that is specifically for sales roles. You can see that the different bar charts are tied to the different phases of the sales process that I showed on the earlier slide, on the previous slide with the funnel from lead gen through closing. And so we can use the person's behavioral profile to determine which steps in the sales process they may perform well in and where they might need some help. And as I touched on earlier, the bar chart, the bar graph on the left also shows the person's natural and adapted style. So again, in other words, when left to their own devices, what is this person's natural style? When they're left alone, what are their dominant behaviors? And also, what is their adapted style? How are they going to adjust when being influenced by external factors? So imagine a sales associate giving a pitch to a room of individuals from on the prospect side, from the buying company. How might that associate adjust their style given the behavior of others in the room? And that's what the adapted style on this chart reflects. So what does this look like in practice? So we've given an individual the DiSC assessment, and we get this chart. Applying this individual's profile to the phases of the sales process, we can see that they have a weakness in the qualifying phase. This is the step in the process where a sales associate needs to be trying to tease out if a given prospect is really ready to buy or not. Are they not quite there yet? And they're assessing, does it make sense to move a given prospect to the next phase of the process? So if you are their manager, the manager of this individual, and you've got their DiSC profile report, and you see this, what are some potential actions you could take? Well, you might decide to invest in training that specifically targets this phase of the sales process, the qualifying phase. Or for this individual, maybe in the short term, until they're able to improve their abilities in the qualifying phase, maybe you send in another member of your team who's particularly strong in this phase, who can help out that individual through the qualifying step, through the qualifying meetings, if you will, to help get the prospect from this step through to the next one, as opposed to potentially losing a prospect at the qualifying step, or inappropriately classifying them, let's say, as a legitimate buyer, or somebody who's not quite ready yet and maybe should not be giving as much attention. So either way, we're leveraging the power of the person's DiSC profile to deploy targeted solutions through training and through assisting this individual in this particular step of the sales process. So let's look at it from, same individual. Let's look at it from a different perspective. They scored quite high in prospecting and the prospecting and closing phases. So what do we do with this individual? Well, we can leverage these traits by sending this person to networking events, trade shows, having them do cold outreach. This is the phase where they're going to do particularly well. Also, this is your closer, right? Send this person in to get the deal done. If you've got a buyer, a potential prospect that has been dragging out a bit, they can't seem to make a decision, this could be the person you want to send in to close out that deal and get that prospect over the hurdle. So DiSC assessments can be utilized for, obviously, again, identifying a potential area that a member of your sales team could use some help with, that they need some training, or that you might want to send in somebody else to assist them during a given phase that they're not particularly strong in. Maybe you've got, but we can expand on this, right? We can take this to the next level. We can do DiSC assessments on an entire team and tie all the individual results together into a team report. Is your team struggling with lead gen and the earlier stages of the funnel? Well, maybe through a team assessment, we find that you've got a team of closers, and you need to broaden the skill set of the team by either doing some additional training for the team you've got, or maybe doing some strategic hires and bringing in people who are better at the top end of the funnel. And oh, by the way, we can use DiSC assessments for during the hiring process. We can give a DiSC assessment to a given candidate or a couple of candidates and see, could they be that person you are lacking on your current team, who's going to be really strong at cold outreach and again, the top end of the funnel. The power of DiSC is really quite remarkable. So now let's look at those individuals who are on the other side of the table, the buyers, your prospects, and how we can leverage DiSC to impact their behavior. Remember that DiSC is all about assessing a person's behavioral style. Typically, a person is going to score high in one or two of the four categories. And those one or two leading traits are going to come through in how a person presents themselves, how they behave, how they engage with you as the seller. And so you can even draw some conclusions about how they, what their behavioral profile is based on how they dress, based on how their office is decorated. And I'll get into that in the coming slides. So what we want to do is we want to be able to train sales individuals, the sellers, on how to recognize an individual's given dominant DiSC profile, and then adjust their selling approach to that individual. So what does this look like? Let's say you're selling to someone who displays the characteristics on this slide. This individual is they look you in the eye. They strike you as extremely confident. They move along quickly. They may even seem a bit impatient, when you call them on the phone or during a meeting. This person's primary behavioral style is dominance. They score high in dominance. We refer to that person as a high D. If you are in the sales process and you can recognize this, how should you respond? How should you engage as a person? Well, get to the point. Don't get way down into the fine details for your product or service. Now, that being said, don't hide anything from this individual. If there's something that your product or service doesn't do, be upfront about it. Tell that person clearly that that's the case. Talk about winning with this individual. Hey, Tom, do you want to have the best security system on the market, or do you want the next thing? The dominant person is all about the win. They are extremely competitive. So continuing with this approach, if you're selling to someone and you're sitting in their sales office and the office is a bit disorganized, they've got kind of piles of papers all over the place. You look at how they're dressed. Maybe they dress a little flashy, a little trendy. The individual they're bubbly, they're very friendly. This person's dominant style is influence. They're a high I. Again, how do you respond? Don't rush the conversation. Ask them about other things beyond just what you're there to talk about specifically when it comes to your product or service. Engage them in other topics. Ask about their hobbies, their family, what else they like to do. Regardless of the dominant style, you want to be mirroring their behavior, so their style. So if you deduce that they're high I, be warm, be chatty, be friendly. One thing to watch out to when dealing with somebody who's high on influence is you're going to have to work to keep them on topic, right? They're going to be chatty, they're going to be friendly, they're going to want to talk about their hobbies, their family. And you may find yourself having sat in their office for an hour or two and realize you never got around to actually, talking about what you're there for. So you're going to have to, again, mirror their behavior, but at the same time, work to keep things on track and bring it back to the topic at hand. Talking about your product or service. Again, let's keep going. You've got someone who doesn't seem to be in a huge hurry. They're really hard to read. They've got a poker face. They don't seem to be someone who, is easily perturbed. This person's high on steadiness. That's their dominant style. Again, you want to be mirroring their behavior. Don't be in a rush. You also want to make sure with people who are high in steadiness is that you must deliver on your commitments. A high S person does not want to be associated with anything that doesn't turn out the way they said it would. They don't want to be tied to anything that results in a potential failure or, goes a slightly different direction than, what they committed to those that they have to report to. So, again, and also high S folks are not going to want to move forward. They're not going to move forward with anything that has any degree of uncertainty or that leaves them with any concern in their mind about the product or service. They want to be very confident in what they're going to be purchasing. And then finally, of course, the last style, which is compliance, our high Cs. They are all about data and process. They're very straight-laced. They want the details. They want to get the data. And you, as a sales individual, are going to have to be very patient with this person. They're going to want to get all the information about your product or service, and they're going to want to take it away and do their analysis. And you're going to have to be okay with that. They're not going to make a decision, on the spot, so to speak. They're going to tell you, okay, I got to go think about this. Thanks for the info. They may reach out to you in a day or two and ask for even more information, and you're going to have to kind of let them go through that process. Don't try to rush them into a decision. Continue to reach out, continue to ping them occasionally, but you're going to have to let them go through their analysis, like I said, to arrive at a decision. So just like we can use DiSC profiles to assess an individual's fit for a certain role or their capabilities in a given process within the sales funnel, we can also leverage this to read the room, right? We can determine a person's dominant traits and mirror their behavior to better align with that individual's decision-making process and how they come to conclusions, if you will. So we can even go to that next level. We can even modify our sales assets, our brochures, cut sheets, etc., to match the dominant traits of an individual. If you're again trying to sell to a group of decision makers who all seem to be highly compliant, could be a room of engineers. Again, they're going to want the data. Your cut sheets for your product, your brochures for your service better have the data there. That's what they're going to want to see. That's what's going to draw them in. So again, the power of DiSC is really remarkable, and how it can be applied to a wide array of roles and responsibilities for an individual and in a given situation. So before I open things up for questions, I want to note that we've got some great upcoming webinars. On June 9th, Rich will be talking about how to lower taxes while still simultaneously improving employee benefits. On July 21st, Gina will be talking about reshoring initiatives, and I'll be back to talk about the seven C's of leadership on August 18th. Again, everyone, this has been another installment of the Manufacturer's Efficiency webinar series. My name is Matt Wizeman, and I'm a certified exit planning advisor and business leadership coach. My partners are Rich Bello, strategic partner with Schooley Mitchell, and Gina Tabasso, founder of Barracuda B2B. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic or just to reach out to us, please use the QR codes on the screen. And with that, I will open things up for questions.
Matt, nice job. I had a question with regards to your experiences with sales teams and kind of the makeup and using the DiSC, like you mentioned, to identify the strengths or the personality types or the dominant traits for each member. Have you found that it's more successful to try and find or to try and through training make each salesperson more well-rounded across the different traits,
Hmm.
or to have specialists? Like I think about baseball, you have like your leadoff hitter
Yeah.
and your power hitter and your starting pitcher and your relief pitchers. Like, what have you found to be the better strategy in that sense?
Yeah, obviously if we're talking about a larger organization where they've got they got multiple, a large sales team, right? You know, are you going to get an individual who scores low in a particular phase of the sales process? Are you going to dramatically raise their score through training? Yeah, probably not. You are probably better off if you've got somebody on the team who scores really high in that area. Yeah, you're better off maybe having them help that individual out, for a given sales opportunity. And of course, it's going to help the individual with a lower score because they're going to see how the person with the higher score operates, right? So that'll be, think of it as an additional form of training. But look, if you're talking about a small sales team where you've only got one or two people, then training is the next best thing, and maybe just investing a little bit more to try to raise that person's capability for that phase as much as possible. Um, so yeah, if you've got the resources, if you've got a big enough sales team, yeah, send in the person who's really strong in that particular area. That's definitely going to be result in a better outcome. But training is the next best thing.
I I took a bunch of notes. I was shocked by how much I just learned. I have been given the disc profile many, many times in my career, usually by an employer who's looking for like a certain cultural fit
Yeah.
with the um I remember one of the disc profiles I had done, they were shocked at the results because the manager at the department was a C, and he said every single person he hired was a C,
Yeah.
like. I'm not a C. So he was surprised that, he hired me. They gave me the disc profile, months after I was hired. But what I guess my questions were, how how accurate is it? And also, I I had heard, I was told in my career that it can change. And
Yeah.
I saw that for me it did. When I initially tested, I was high D, 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 D. And then later on down the line, I was equally high D and I.
Mm.
So I wanted to see if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, totally true. An individual can absolutely change. I was talking with just the other day with a long-term, somebody who's kind of at the later stages of their career, let's say, and he talked about he had done disc profiles himself, just like you just mentioned, Gina, and he had talked about how when he was younger, really pushing hard, he was high D, almost off the charts. And now that he's a little later in his career, and he's retaken the assessment, his D has dropped and his I has come up. So yes, and absolutely true. A person can change over the course of their career as they make, as they become more experienced, et cetera. Yes, it will change. Um, Going back to your first comment, Gina, yeah, I mean, as you said, like attracts like. So, and what does that lead to in organizations? I mean, if this manager, like you talked about, it was without him even knowing it, had a tendency to just hire people who matched him, you get kind of, you group think, is the risk, right? Where you've got everybody who kind of thinks the same way. Nobody's bringing in alternate perspectives. That's not, not necessarily a great thing. So, yeah, these tools, this assessments can be profile in that regard to find somebody who is going to bring a different perspective to the organization. Sure, absolutely. We use it for assisting clients with hiring decisions. I got two candidates. Let's give them a DiSC assessment and see who might be really the right person, based on their profile. Yeah, do that all the time.
So as far as accuracy or reliability goes, I mean, you know, I, I mean, I know a lot of times they tell you answer honestly and answer,
Yeah.
not what you think they want you to hear, but what you really feel about it. And I think a lot of times people answer those personality tests the way they think the hiring manager wants
Yeah.
they want to hear. Like the Myers-Briggs, I remember how weird I thought it was. It's like, oh, who's going to answer yes? Like, yes, I like to hurt animals. Like, even if you do, are you going to admit that? So, some of these tests, I just wonder, how accurate they are.
It's so totally fair question. So again, our the assessments we use are pretty extensive, and people who take them will say, "Geez, there were certain steps where I felt like I was answering the same question, but it was worded just a little differently." And that is it's done to try to tease out where somebody may have answered, what they think they were supposed to say versus what their actual profile is, and draw that out. Now, yes, when I've, what our assessments, the process is the person takes the assessment, they get the report, I get the report, we both go through it, and then we meet to review it. And, the instructions I give the individual is go through and highlight things you disagree with, you highly agree with, you didn't understand. And those are the things we talk about when I do the debrief. So when I get to a step where a person says, yeah, I didn't agree with what this said about me. Then okay, let's talk about that, and we'll kind of go through it. And sometimes the conclusion is the person goes, yeah, you know what, the assessment was right. That is me. It kind of turns. They start out thinking, no, that's not me, and then we kind of talk about it a little bit, and they come to the conclusion, oh yeah, maybe that is me. So yeah, I mean, look, is it bulletproof, Gina? Are there things an individual may feel like it doesn't accurately assess? Sure. But a lot of times when we go through the debrief step, the individuals, they're a little surprised, and they're like, yeah, that this does kind of describe me and how I behave and how I respond in given situations. So yeah, good questions.
Thank you so much. I also, and nothing I need you to expand on, but I was really excited when you mentioned about the natural versus the adapted style. I had never heard of that before. So all the times I've been given a disc, no one ever talked about that. So I'm wondering, like, is D my natural and I is my adapted? But those differentiations were never made for me.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's another power of the assessments we use, which are, quite extensive. All right, well, thank you for joining us, and really appreciate your time, and hope you will join us during our next webinar series on June 9th. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, everybody.